Good morning, everyone. Very privileged to have with us Dr. Azfar Hussain, all the way from Michigan. And it's very late night for him, but I'd like to thank him for making this time for us and for the creative writing certificate course session. This is session 10. We're almost at the end of our journey, 6-week journey. And Dr. Azfar Hussain, as you know, is a critic, as a columnist. He is an activist. He is definitely an academic, and he has a host of many different identities, which I hope you will be bringing in the course of his talk here today, which will be focused on the philosophy of translation. And I won't take up too much more time of your session, so I will hand over the podium to Dr. Azfar Hussain. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Professor Rahman. I thank you for that introduction. And I think I would do well at the outset to ask you to introduce yourself so that I have some ideas of where you are coming from before I begin. So I have been introduced, all right. So would you mind saying a few words about yourself? I'm particularly interested in knowing, about your academic background, and what you are currently doing and your areas of interests.
Okay, I will start with Abrar Farhan Zaman.
Thank you, ma'am, for giving me the floor. My name is Abrar. I used to be a student of University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. I completed my undergraduate studies there. I actually did this course last year as well, and I got to attend your lecture. I really loved how you gave us handouts, which allowed us to tap into the humorous side of Shakespeare. We learned how to make fun of people in a more creative way. It's great to be back here. I'm looking forward to learning from you again. I'm currently doing my graduate studies and a Master's of Educational Leadership at BRAC University. I teach debate, both to school students and university students. I'm training the BRAC University Debating Club. Today's the out rounds of a tournament, so hopefully we do well and we win the championship. But I'm very excited to start the day with your lecture. It's a strong start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abrar. Can I have Maruf?
Good evening, sir. Myself, Maruf Hassan. I have just completed my graduation from Chittagong University, and I have joined this course so that I can learn about the craft of translation and all the aspects of translation that is. I'm looking forward to learn it.
Maruf, isn't your camera working? Thank you for that introduction. Okay, yeah, all right. Thank you, Maruf. Yeah.
Thank you, Maruf. Can you have Nasif Khalid?
Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. Good morning. I am Nasif Khalid Shadin. I completed my graduation and post-graduation from Jahangirnagar University. Currently, I am a lecturer at Department of English in Daffodil International University. And I first got interested in translation when I got the opportunity to translate Moshe Yeager's The Muslims of Burma. So I started translating the book, and I realized that I don't have much idea about the craft of it, and I faced a lot of challenges and find my own limitations. Then I got to study a course called Translation Studies, and I got to teach it for a semester as well. So I got to know a bit about the theoretical part of it, but I was interested in this course to know the practical aspect of it, like how to use that learning and actually translate, especially literary texts. So that is what drew me to this course. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nasif. Solika Akhtar.
Hello, sir. I'm Solika Akhtar. I have completed my bachelor's and master's from University of Dhaka. My major was in applied linguistics and English language teaching. And currently, I'm working as a lecturer in the Department of English in East West University. In my undergrad years, I had some experiences of translating subtitles for a few programs, which is why I joined this course to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you, Solika. Sumaita Marjan.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. This is Sumaita Marzan. I have completed my bachelor's and master's from Bangladesh University of Professionals, and my major was in English Literature and Cultural Studies.
Mhm.
And I am currently working as a lecturer in the same university since 2021. And about translation, my interests have always been there, though I have never done anything formally or professionally. I have done informal works, but I wanted to join this course to learn extended things about translation theoretically and practically. So hopefully I'll have a good session with you today.
Theoretically and practically, all right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sumaita. Now we have Shushmita Shongita.
Hello, sir. This is Shmita Shongita Mridha. I completed my graduation and post-graduation both from Bangladesh University of Professionals, and currently I'm working as a lecturer at Canadian University of Bangladesh. I completed my master's in English Literature and Cultural Studies. So there was a course, translation studies offered there, but I couldn't take it at that time. That's when I was really interested, and that's why I'm here actually. So I'm looking forward to a great session here.
Thank you. Thank you, Shushmita.
Thank you, Shushmita. Trisha.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. I'm Shahra Islam Chisha from Bangladesh University of Professionals. I completed my BA from English department in English Literature and Cultural Studies, and I have been interested in translation for quite a while now, but I never had the chance to get into it. So when I saw this course, I thought that I should grab the chance, and that's why I'm here. And I've been following your post for a long time, so I would love to learn a lot from you and hear you talk today. Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Thank you also, Tisha.
Thank
And
you, Trisha. We have Zareen next.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Unfortunately, my camera isn't working. My name is Zerin Tofa Farhat. I have completed my graduation and post-graduation from Jahangirnagar University, Department of English. My major was literatures in English and cultural studies. Currently, I'm working as a lecturer at Daffodil International University. Um, I have done some I have some experience in script translating, but I don't have any formal training as a translator or um, I would like to learn the craft theoretically and practically, which is why I joined this course. And that's about it.
Thank you, Zareen.
Thank you, sir.
Uh,
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. Rohini, if you'd introduce yourself.
Hello, assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. My name is Rohini Zakaria Oishi, and I've been working as a lecturer at East West University at the Department of English. I have completed my honors and masters from Dhaka University. My masters was focused on English literature. And the reason why I have joined this course is because I have always felt an interest to translate short stories, but didn't have basically any understanding where to begin it from of this craft. So I thought probably this course would give me a solid ground to start it with from. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohini. And that's about it. Over to you.
oh, thank you, Professor Rahman. And I'm very delighted to be with you here. And let me begin with a modest but vital challenge I have set for myself. So in this workshop lecture, should I call it lecture? Maybe it's workshop intervention. I aim to gather and reflect on what you have encountered so far in ULAB's creative translation workshop, as it is called, drawing not only on conceptual insights, but also on the practical and procedural dimensions of translation. That is, I hope to offer what I would call a philosophical summing up, a reflective synthesis that connects theory with practice, ideas with intricacies, and language with labor. Translation, after all is said and done, is work of labor. And labor is work. Labor is also love made visible. But I won't stop there. I will also take up the question of the politics of translation, which I hope would serve as a new topic so far. This is the 10th lecture, I think, 10th intervention, isn't it? This is the 10th one. So you have already traversed quite a range of issues relating to the pragmatics and even the mechanics of translation. So maybe it's time to talk about something else, in this case, the politics, the philosophy and politics of translation. So Professor Rahman has already, talk to you about the topic that I will be dwelling on, but it was mentioned that it would be philosophy, but yes, philosophy, but also politics. I mean, politics in the most charged and material sense of the term. Politics as it relates to power, and this the power relations that translation itself embodies, enacts, and sometimes resists. Translation is never neutral. It is always embedded in and often entangled with structures of domination, histories of erasure, and asymmetries of access and authority. I, for one, think that you can never be a good translator if you are not adequately equipped with the knowledge of the ways in which translation functions, translation itself as an activity functions at more levels than one. Of course, you have to be equipped with pragmatics, but you also have to be equipped with perception, because without perception, the pragmatics would lose their force. There's this connection between the two. So that's why I insist, and it might sound weird to some people, but I'll make that clear eventually. I insist that every practicing translator must, in some measure, be a political thinker, or at least politically aware, especially about the politics of language, of representation, and of the very act of carrying across meaning from one word to another, from one world to another. So the title of my workshop lecture is then The Philosophy and Politics of Translation, on the urgency, oddity, and ontology of translation, or translation as world making, as a world breaking, and as world rewriting. These three things, let me re-emphasize. These three aspects of translation as an activity, as what? Translation as what? Translation as labor. Translation as labor of love and love of labor, both coming dialectically. Three things: translation as world making, as a world breaking, as a world rewriting. By the way, you can interrupt me at any point of time if there is any lack of clarity on my part, or if you want to raise any question. I just don't want to make it sound like a, monologue, So I would really appreciate it if you interrupt me even with a question, if you interrupt me with an observation, and if you feel stimulated by any particular point I make or any particular observation I make, you are very welcome to intervene. Let's make this a lively and vibrant site of exchange, right? So it's a long title. I've given a title already, but it's a long title because I believe translation itself is a long and layered act, an act that moves between fidelity and invention, between rupture and continuity, between worlds known and unknown. Together, let's explore this act, its wonders, its tensions, its stakes. And I would like to share with you a couple of epigraphs to make my first point of departure. The first one is from my all-time favorite Marxist cultural theorist, Walter Benjamin, from his by now classic work called The Translator's Task. Are you familiar with this work? Actually, probably Professor Fakhrul Alam, might have talked about Walter Benjamin while talking about the theory of translation. Walter Benjamin has this great classic work called The Task of the Translator. Sometimes it's translated as The Translator's Task. So I will use a quote from Walter Benjamin as an epigraph to my talk, this morning or this evening, this night, So I quote Benjamin. The translator's task is to find the intention toward the language into which the work is to be translated on the basis of an echo of the original is awakened in it, unquote. Now, that was from Walter Benjamin. Now, the second epigraph is constituted by George Steiner, literary critic George Steiner. Perhaps you are familiar with this name, with George's work, George Steiner. So George Steiner's statement, I'm glad that Professor Fakhrul Alam has referred to that particular quote. Thanks for letting me know. So the second epigraph is from George Steiner's statement. It's George Steiner's statement from his 1975 book called After Babel, or Babel as it is pronounced, on aspects of translation, and I quote Steiner here. Hegel and Heidegger posit that being must engage other being in order to achieve self-definition. This is true only in part of language, which at the phonetic and grammatical levels can function inside its own limits of diacritical differentiation. But it is pragmatically true of all but the most rudimentary acts of form and expression, existence in history. The claim to recognizable identity or style are based on relations to other articulate constructs. Of such relations, translation is the most graphic, unquote. I know it's a long quote, pretty loaded, dense, and I would love to unpack this later. And so let me dwell on the troublesome task of translation itself. I've called the troublesome task of translation. And let me now provide a provocation. I don't trust monolingualism. It seems a little too tidy, like someone who organizes this bookshelf. My bookshelf is there, organizes the bookshelf by color and not content. Monolingualism may appear clean, but beneath the surface lurks a quiet violence, a muffling of tongues, a silencing of histories. Translation, in contrast, is gloriously messy. Translation, in contrast, is gloriously messy. Of course, insistently dialogic and delightfully impure. And that's precisely its strength. Any questions you have so far, though? All right. So indeed, translation is not merely a linguistic act. It is a world historical necessity, a philosophical intervention, and at times an act of subversion, seduction, or even sabotage. You may chuckle, but ask yourself, when was the last time you didn't rely on some form of translation to access meaning? Maybe this morning, while checking the news, which is not always a good thing for many people, but it contributes to their blood pressure. So as it is said, so maybe checking the news, or let's say scrolling through some, subtitled videos on TikTok, or microwaving leftovers, using instructions badly translated from Korean. Perhaps you laughed at an awkward phrase or winced at a political gaffe, but even laughter, and especially wincing, proves my point. Translation matters. Translation matters sometimes so much so that the entire wars or romances or microwaved meals hang in the balance. So translation, as I have long argued, and I will continue to argue until I have translated myself into a footnote. It's not just about language transfer. It's not just about the craft that you are talking about. Of course, craft is extremely important, no doubt. The craft of translation does not exhaust the field of translation as such. So translation is more than craft. It's not just about language transfer. It's about world making. It's about carrying the world across thresholds, borders, fault lines, and doing so with the humility of a guest and the creativity of a thief. Chor, a creativity of a thief who improves the stolen goods. I put it this way. A creativity, the creativity of a thief. Horace, by the way, one of my favorite aestheticians, if you will, and critics, put it this way once, that art lies in concealing art. So translation, also good translation, lies in concealing its labor. But there is another school. There is another school of thought that doesn't really agree with Horace's contention. But anyway, I'll take up that issue a little later. But let me continue to make the point I've been trying to make here. So yes, stolen goods. What's carried is not just a phrase or a paragraph. It's a politics, a poetics, even a past. Indeed, translation operates at the intersection of, now I will sound a bit philosophical, the Heideggerian way probably. So translation, operates, mark my words here, translation operates at the intersection of the wording of the word and the wording of the world. It is not only about carrying meaning across languages, it is about carrying lives, contradictions, desires, dreams, or nightmares, even failures across asymmetrical terrains. It is movement. It is metaphor. It is, in George Steiner's sense, deciphering existence itself. I'm speaking of George Steiner's seminal work again. It's called After Babel, Aspects of Language and Translation, that first appeared in the year 1975. And I think I would also recommend this book to anyone interested in language and translation. Not only in language, but also in the philosophy of translation. Now, let me quote Steiner further. I quote, "To understand is to decipher, to hear significance is to translate," unquote. To understand, mark his statement. It's a pithy statement, a short statement, a couple of statements, short. To understand, I quote, "To understand is to decipher, to hear significance is to translate," unquote. Now, let me slow down and take you on a journey. How are you doing? That's the beginning question of this journey. How are you doing? How?
Feeling a bit overwhelmed with all the information in the head.
Already, did I provide you only with information or ideas?
Yeah, I think it's both in
Two eyes, information and ideas. Okay. So you feel overwhelmed. Now I will try to Solika. Is that the
yes,
way you pronounce your name? Thank you for your
Yes, sir.
appreciate for your intervention and for sharing your state of being with me. Okay. So I will I'll be light now. I'll be not so serious maybe. Philosophy itself can be fun. So let me start with comedy. All right. So because where there is language, there is miscommunication. Language minus miscommunication is no language. Do you know that one of the important constitutive elements of language is miscommunication? Every communication tends to be, I won't say is miscommunication, is miscommunication. If there is no miscommunication, there is no language, actually. We haven't thought about this. This is counterintuitive, though. So anyway, so I'm talking about this comedy. Okay, let's begin with it. Where there is miscommunication, there is comedy and sometimes catastrophe. And I, in fact, last year, not so long ago, I think in November last year, I delivered a plenary talk on translation as a transnational and, phenomenon, translation as praxis. That was the topic. And I used this story there, actually. So I'm going to use that again, share that with you. I'm not sure if did anybody here get to attend that plenary talk on translation I delivered last year in November? Organized by, of course, the English department, ULAB's English department. So first, the KFC story. KFC, do you know what KFC is? Anybody? KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. All right, good. So you're familiar with that. So when Kentucky Fried Chicken entered the Chinese market, its original slogan, finger licking good in China, finger licking good, got rendered as eat your fingers off. So mark this. Now that's not fast food. Hell no, that's self-cannibalism. And the culinary philosophy, if you will, of menus devorandum est. It means, it's a Latin phrase that means that the hand must be devoured. This Latin motto of self-cannibalism. Menus, M-A-N-U-S, menus is a Latin phrase. Menus devorandum. Devorandum est. Means the hand must be devoured. So that was the thing. Translation. Finger licking good becomes eat your fingers off. Now let me move from the KFC. It actually happened. I mean, it's a true story, So let me move from the KFC story to Pepsi's resurrection campaign. Interesting story here. Another favorite. Pepsi's slogan, "Come alive with Pepsi." Pepsi became, in Mandarin, Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave. Let me repeat this. Original, "Come alive with Pepsi," and it became, in Mandarin, Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave. Now imagine a chilled soft drink that doubles as a necromantic potion. That's some brand promise. But mistranslation is not always funny, though. It's funny, of course. But it's not always funny. Think of diplomatic documents, international treaties, misreading religious texts. Even the 2003 Iraq invasion had a linguistic trail. Faulty translations of Arabic intelligence data contributing to the, weapon of this mass destruction myth. Right? So what is the takeaway here? What is it? Translation isn't cute. It is consequential. It can broker peace. It can broker peace or broker war. It can rescue or erase. It can tickle or kill. Thus, let's not pretend that translation is always angelic. It can misbehave. Indeed, mistranslation is the rebellious cousin of translation, always crashing the party with explosive consequences. We have already been familiar with KFC's famous entry into China with the phrase "finger licking good," which is translated as "eat your fingers off." A new philosophy of self-consumption was born. Or take Pepsi's Chinese debut again. Pepsi brings you back to life. Became Pepsi's brings your ancestors back from the grave. Now that's a resurrection nobody asked for, unless you were dying to meet great Uncle Wong again over lunch. So such examples show that translation is not a machine process. It is interpretive, embodied, hilarious, hazardous. It's a human practice. And like all things a human, it's vulnerable to both blunder and brilliance. By the way, I have this crazy penchant for alliterations. I have a poem called Dhaka and Dirty Dialectics. Actually, if you're interested in knowing about Dhaka, you can take a look at it if you're interested. It's available online again. The poem is called Dhaka and Dirty Dialectics. And one of the lines in that poem is this, a confessional line is this: I'm madly in love with alliterations. So yes, but mistranslation is not always laughable. It can be lethal. We have got that sense by now. It can lead to wars. Remember, weapon of mass destructions, found via mistranslated intel, to cross-cultural calamities, and to what my comrade Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the African writer, African novelist, playwright, theorist, activist, I think one of the greatest African novelists and activists, calls the death of one language under the heel of another in his most recent book called On Translation, The Language of Languages. Translation, therefore, like money, sometimes even like God, is power. It can colonize or decolonize. It can homogenize or harmonize. It can export ideology or import resistance. Now, let me invoke some cultural philosophers to get at the philosophy of translation. Not to perform, I assure you, but to clarify what is at stake. We are not here to just play name-dropping bingo at a Derrida-themed dinner party. We're here to make sense of why translation matters. So, enter Walter Benjamin again. In his landmark essay, The Task of the Translator, Benjamin insists that translation is not about copying or equivalence, not about lining up word for word like soldiers in a grammar parade. No, for him, translation is a metaphysical event, a kind of mystical quest. Now, let me point this out very clearly, that what Benjamin says has resonates with me and continues to resonate with me and with others. That then Benjamin doesn't tell us the whole story. There are much more. There are more things in art and heaven than that can be dreamt of in Walter Benjamin's philosophy. I'm twisting this quote a little bit from where. Anybody? Where am I have alluded to some lines. Where?
Hamlet.
There you go, Hamlet. So there are more things in art and heaven than that can be dreamt of in Benjamin's translation philosophy. That's what I'm saying. But Benjamin is still important. We need to pay attention to what he's trying to tell us. The translator task, as Benjamin points out, is to reveal the pure language, within quotation marks, slumbering inside every tongue. Translation becomes an exorcism of sorts, liberating a sacred essence trapped within linguistic flesh. Think less FedEx and more science. The translator in Benjamin's world isn't a courier, but a conjurer, a linguistic necromancer, coaxing ancestral meaning out of the grave of grammar. Are you getting annoyed by too many at too many alliterations?
No, I really love how you tied it back to the Pepsi story. So it connected nicely.
Okay, Abraham, thank you for your confirmation and affirmation. Okay, as I've said, if you want to share your ideas with me in the process, you're very welcome. Or if you want to raise a question, you're very welcome. So there is this Walter Benjamin, and then there is George Steiner. I already mentioned him, and I will keep mentioning a little more, and then I'll stop mentioning him. So in his work After Babel, a title which itself implies we are all babbling, cosmically lost in translation, Steiner raises the stakes, further. He claims that All understanding is translation. All understanding is translation. You don't read someone, you translate them. You don't even understand yourself without translation. Your memories, your traumas, your dreams last night involving a giant octopus, and your thesis maybe require translation just to become coherent. Think. I want you to think deeply about translation this time, just without being, worried about the technicalities of translation, like, well, how can I make this line cute? Is this line accurate from Qazi Nazrul Islam's poem? I'll be talking about that a little later, but let's think as you go. Thank you, Solika. Yeah. So George Steiner, so you need translation to make things even coherent. Translation then is not a side gig for multilinguals. It is the human condition. As Steiner writes, now I will quote Steiner again with the same quote again, to understand is to decipher, to hear significance is to translate. Sometimes I will repeat a few quotes here and there. It's like leitmotiv, it's like leitmotiv, like refrain. You know what a leitmotiv or a refrain is? Something that, like in a song, certain words or turns of expression are recurrent. They keep coming back. So translate. So to hear significance is to translate. And to mishear, what about mishearing? Well, that's how we get autocorrect. Mishear, post-structuralism, and several awkward breakups. I'll be taking up those issues a little later. So what happens? What happens when we fail to translate each other, our histories, our neighbors, our lovers? We get miscommunication. Yes, but also violence. A friend of mine actually had a pretty weird breakup in a romantic relationship because of translation, mistranslation, miscommunication, and that's part of life. When you get miscommunication, yes, you get it, but you also get violence. We also get silencing. We get confusion weaponized. We get Brexit. We get Trump tweets that require not just translation into coherence, but into ethics, then into therapy, and eventually into dark comedy. Sometimes you need a team of semioticians, shamans, and stand-up comics just to parse one sentence. So let me circle back to Walter Benjamin, because I do think he was onto something luminous. He tells us again and again, translation is not reproduction. It is revelation. It is release. It is the jailbreak of meaning. For Benjamin, translation is an act of poetic liberation, an attempt to access a utopian Esperanto, a deep, wordless resonance within language itself. It is not transactional, it is transcendental. So what Walter Benjamin does, in my opinion, is he elevates the very status of translation. He philosophizes the task of translation abundantly, to the point of making us think in more directions than one. And that's the that's the task, probably not only of the translator, of course not. That's the task of the philosopher too. He himself, Walter Benjamin himself, keeps translating his own ideas into insights, and his insights back into his ideas. And in the process, he makes us think, and he makes us translate our own understanding of Walter Benjamin himself. So, invoking Walter Benjamin, we have maintained that translation is not just transactional, but also transcendental. Now, granted, that might sound grand. So let's get humble. Let's get hilariously concrete. Even in the most mundane microwave lit corners of modern life. Translation does its strange, sacred work. Even read those glorious mistranslations and product manuals. My personal favorite comes from a Korean to English food instruction. Korean to English food instruction. Stab potato violently before warming. That's not just a dinner prep suggestion. That's an existential cry. Somewhere in that bad sentence lives Benjamin's pure language screaming. But here is the point. Translation is everywhere. It sneaks into our kitchens before it ever reaches our Kantian critiques, if you will. And sometimes before it brings lunch, it brings laughter. Steiner again reminds us, to understand is to translate. Our leitmotif. That means comprehension itself. Comprehension itself. What is comprehension? Is an act of transformation. Is an act of transformation. Every act of reading, listening, arguing, flirting, or even forgiving is also an act of decoding, of negotiating, of reaching across. Mark this. So let's be honest, even your digestive system is a kind of translator. It interprets food into fuel, or at least tries to. Though my most recent attempt at translating a greasy burger into bodily sustenance turned into a brutal act of internal literary criticism. The burger had themes. The themes had consequences. Yes, the burger had themes. The themes had consequences. But I digress. So translation then is not an afterthought. It is not secondary. It is foundational. It is how we survive, how we connect, how we fail, and how we try again. Whether we are channeling Walter Benjamin or stabbing potatoes, translation remains the most noble and most absurd of human acts. So I stop here to have a little bit of conversation with you, and then I will begin. I have more things to say about the philosophy and politics of translation, of course. So any questions? Any concerns? Any observations? Any commentary? Any digressive thought, for that matter? Yeah, go ahead, Abra.
Professor, I noticed that you have Alan Badiou's books with you.
Yeah.
A lot of the books that a comparative literature student or someone interested in the field needs to read are translated works. So could you share a bit with us from your experiences or observations about how translation enables or empowers comparative literature?
So that again, translation. I'm so far actually sharing with you my perception of translation, of course. But you are saying that which
how
experience?
translation
Thank you for your
enables
question.
Thank you, Professor. How translation empowers and enables comparative literature. For example, Alan Badiou.
Oh,
He was
Alan Badiou.
translated.
Yeah, I'm glad that you have mentioned. Thank you, Abrar. I'm glad that you have noticed Alan Badiou's books on my shelf. Yeah, indeed. And Alan Badiou is not just, an author on my shelf. Alan Badiou is also a friend of mine. Why am I saying this? Because Alan Badiou and I work together for this organization called, it's a research organization, and it's called the Global Center for Advanced Studies. Its headquarters are in Ireland right now. It has several chapters, and it is also, part of its headquarters also based in New York. So I work as the vice president of this particular organization, Global Center for Advanced Studies. So I have had the pleasure and honor of having him as my colleague. He's, by the way, one of the leading philosophers of our time. He's a French philosopher. And he is not only a philosopher, but he's also an aesthetician, because he's famous for his book called A Handbook in Aesthetics. In fact, he there takes a pretty interesting position vis-a-vis the relationship between philosophy and aesthetics. Aesthetics is only, as you know, is part of philosophy. And then in a handbook of aesthetics, he in fact raises this question: can you really have aesthetics minus philosophy? So that's one question. Another question, he there talks about comparative literature himself. He talks about comparative literature. In fact, there is one chapter which is, I'm not sure, Abrar, have you read that book? Because your question, in fact, makes me think of a particular chapter of this book which actually deals with not only translation but also comparative literature. And Alan Badiou makes a general point there, and a point which has been made by others as well. The point being that, translation makes comparative literature possible, and translation makes world literature possible. And translation for Alan Badiou, as it is for, as it is for Walter Benjamin, is a form unto itself. It can have its sovereignty even, relative sovereignty. People think that translation, there are some who think that translation is parasitical. Like, translation is parasitical because you translate, so you need an original, you are dependent on the original, and therefore you are a parasite. This parasitical approach, this, this idea that translation is parasitical has been challenged by Alan Badiou. Alan Badiou thinks that it is a form in its own right. So does Walter Benjamin. Walter Benjamin doesn't talk about this extraordinary faithfulness to the original, or religious faithfulness to the original. No, In fact, I'm reminded here of what Borges once funnily said. Borges, you are familiar with Borges? Borges, this Latin American one of the greatest Latin American writers in the 20th century, fiction writer, an essayist, a reflector, a philosopher, and so on and so forth. He has many identities. So Borges, in fact, puts it this way: the translation, the original follows the translation, not the other way around. So what does that mean? He's making fun of this idea of being absolutely religiously faithful to translation. And by the way, I'm here talking about creative translation in particular. You have to be faithful, of course, under many circumstances. But when it comes to the question of creative translation, of course, you have to be also creative, understandably, as simple as that. So Alan Badiou emphasizes, creativity for sure with regard to translation, but at the same time telling us that this translation itself is a fundamental cognitive act, a fundamental epistemological act. To translate is to know, and to know is to translate. And I would add, to translate is to know, and know more intimately than otherwise. If you want to really know a poem intimately, translate it. Translate it. Translation is a way of knowing, sure, an epistemological means, let's say, okay? But not just an epistemological means. Translation, offers you an intimate way of knowing things, intimate way. If you want to pay a tribute to translation, to any poet, anybody, you translate. It's another way. So Badiou's take is, based on, of course, philosophy. It's a philosophy of translation. Again, his book is called A Handbook of Aesthetics. You might want to check it out.
I'll follow up on that, Professor.
A handbook of, not aesthetics. He doesn't call it aesthetics. AES, THETICS, aesthetics. No, he calls it in aesthetics. He also challenges, this tradition of bourgeois aesthetics, and so on. And he, of course, maintains that there are relationships between translation and politics. There are relationships between translation and comparative literature, of course. To compare, how do you compare? It's also, translation. It involves translation too. Comparison. So I talked about this at some length, in fact, in my lecture on comparative literature. It's also available. I have several lectures, but this lecture is called Comparative Literature and Political Economy. So there, I talk about the relationship between translation and comparative literature. I'm a comparative literature person, actually. I have worked in that area, and so I have lectured on comparative literature quite a bit. And that lecture, relatively recent lecture, I mean, I gave that lecture last year, and it's on, it's on comparative literature and political economy. And in that lecture, of course, I take up the question of translation. Have I answered your question, Abrar? I think, I don't know.
Very extensively, Professor. Thank you. You've given me a lot of things to look into as well, which I appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not probably giving you some practical tips, but you have already gotten a number of them already. This is 10th lecture. So I thought will do some summing up. What you are doing, what you have done so far, you can reflect back on that. So in that spirit, I'm doing it. Okay. Any other questions? Any other observations? Any observations? Sorry.
Sir, I have this. Yes, sir. So I want to share
Nasib, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes. So we have talked about a bit the politics of translation in our previous classes, but now I'm understanding that whether I intend or not, it is a political act. There is no other way around it. I can't say that
That's
I'm
right.
a political or I'm just living
Unpolitical. Right. Very good. Yeah.
So whether I intend or not, my works of translation, as you said, sir, will tickle or will kill. It will have that consequences whether I want it or not, and there is no going around it. So the best would be to, like, I don't know, be sensitive about it and be aware about it when I am, carrying words, as you said, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. You have made a very important point here, whether you are aware or not, it is. And so it is, if you are not aware, then then we should be aware. If I'm not aware, so it will probably prove useful if I remain aware of the fact that translation is, among other things, political. I'm not reducing the state of translation to the political, per se, or the political as such. Translation is more than being a political act, of course, but it is political. Thanks for making that point. Nasib. Nasib, you are a teacher, right?
Yes, sir.
You teach at a university.
Yes, sir. I'm a lecturer at Daffodil International University. Yes.
Okay, yeah, good. So Daffodil International University, I had some students there. I mean, who became teachers. I'm not sure if they're there. Sheikh Nahid Niazi is there still?
No.
No.
Not there.
Okay.
Among the senior teachers, you have Hamidur Rahman sir, Nahid Kaisa ma'am, Liza Sharmin ma'am. They are still there. Binoy Burman sir.
I see. And Abrar, you are also, you mentioned that you
Sir, I'm a debate teacher, so I instruct people in debating. I've been with debating for 10 years now. So it's more
debating.
rhetorical and communication. But literature is my passion. And my grandfather was a writer in Bengali. So I took this course so I could translate some of his poems into English. He was Professor Monir Zaman at Dhaka University. He was a contemporary of Anisul and Dr. Rafiqul Islam.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. So, all right. So let's begin again. Every moment is a new beginning. So now let's get a bit etymological. The English word translation, comes from the Latin translatio, from trans, which means across, and ferre, which means to carry. Ferry, carry. That's it. Carrying across, a crossing, migration in its most elemental, almost primal form. But what's being carried is not a suitcase or a shipment or some nicely packed intellectual cargo. No, it's meaning, metaphor, myth, memory. It's language bearing the weight of worldviews. Now, when you speak of worldviews, then you're speaking of all kinds of things. When you speak of worldviews, what is a worldview? A worldview is a loaded idea, your view about this world, and it cannot be one-dimensional, right? To speak of a worldview is to speak of the political, the social, the biological, even, the spiritual, the religious, and whatnot. And that's why I keep telling my students that your approach to the very study of literature the study of literature itself. Now I'm talking about the study of literature, moving in a slightly different direction. The study, your approach to the study of literature cannot but be interdisciplinary. And what is interdisciplinarity? How do you define interdisciplinarity? There are all kinds of definitions of interdisciplinarity, and I have come up with one. And I think it is probably one of the simplest, modestly speaking, one of the simplest definitions of interdisciplinarity. So what is interdisciplinarity? Interdisciplinarity is an intellectual practice. It is a discursive practice. It is an intellectual and discursive practice whereby, the resources from different disciplines, different fields of studies are brought together and synthesized in the interest of producing new knowledge. Interdisciplinarity. So your approach to the study of literature cannot but be interdisciplinary. It is simply given the fact that literature imitates life, and life probably in turn imitates literature. So, and life itself is not a one-dimensional issue. To talk about life in the context of literature is to talk about all kinds of things. And when you speak of life, then you are speaking of lives, to put life in the plural. And I'm readily reminded of the statement made by none other than one of the greatest fiction writers, Gabriel Garcia Marquez: every human being has 3 lives: a private life, a public life, and a secret life. I recall, when I was an undergrad, somebody asked me this question. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, every human being has 3 lives. So a private life and a public life. So what would be the third one? And I couldn't answer. It didn't come. What would be the third life? Secret life. So Garcia Marquez is telling us that every human being has this secret life as well. Secret. A life that you never share with your partner, with your wife, with your husband, with your friend, with anybody. Your private life can be shared, right? Your private life can be shared with your partner, for instance. It can be shared with friends also. Then your public life is public, rendered public. But secret life? So literature is also about, among other things, the secret life. And if you want to talk about all these 3 lives in the context of literature, or these 3 lives, then you were talking about, of course, this private life, public life, secret life, meaning, talking about this familial life, social life, cultural life, religious life, spiritual life, and so on and so forth. Now you're dealing with all these lives, so you cannot just have aesthetics and saying, well, aesthetics will take care of the entire range of issues dealt with in literature. No, hell no. Yes, aesthetics is very important. I love aesthetics. But you need more than aesthetics. You need biology, you need sociology, you need history, you need historiography, you need political economy, you need philosophy. Now, if you want to be a good translator, a creative translator, and you want to translate stories, you need to understand this. Your perception of literature also matters. If you really want to be an effective, translator of literary works, your perceptions of what literature is or how literature works matter. Your perception. That's why I talked about literature a little bit here. So the point that I was trying to make earlier was this, that, translation, of course, is migration. Translation carries things across, and what is being carried is not a suitcase, not any particular object or some, cargo or something. It's meaning, metaphor, myth, memory. It's language bearing the weight of worldviews. And here is the catch. Here is the catch. As meaning travels, it doesn't remain intact. It bends, it shifts, it mutates. It adapts to new climates. It wears different clothes. No text survives translation unchanged, and that's not a failure. That's precisely the beauty of it. And I'm speaking of creative translation, literary translation here. Take this as an emblematic case. Now I'm going to provide this, provide a particular case. Here is a case study. and I shared this with with other people. I mean, last year. I mean, like when I was talking about translation in my plenary talk last year, my plenary talk organized by ULAB. So this is an emblematic case. The 14th century Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who gifted the world this great work, the Decameron, all right, drew inspiration directly or circuitously from tales in the Arabian Nights. But those tales themselves were shaped by the Panchatantra, a collection of ancient Indian fables teeming with talking animals, political cunning, and earthy wisdom. So how did this cascade of stories make its way to Boccaccio? That's the question. Here is the translingual map of that journey. I want to provide you with a map, a translingual map of that particular journey. So first, from Sanskrit to Persian. Second, from Persian to Arabic. Third, from Arabic to Hebrew. Fourth, from Hebrew to Latin. Fifth, from Latin to Italian. My God. Boccaccio, unknowingly, was channeling the voices of jackals, owls, and ancient Indian philosophers, filtered through all this 5 to 6 linguistic reincarnations. That's not just translation, it's transmigration, or better yet, literary reincarnation, a text reborn again and again in new tongues and new times, accumulating the patina of each culture it touches. And now for the punchline. If you have read the Decameron, you have read a deeply medievalized version of an ancient Indian text that passed through Islamic, Persianate, and Semitic intellectual circuits. That is to say, Europe's literary canon is far more brown, more syncretic, more interconnected than it ever dares to admit. Translation, then, at its root, is translation, a carrying across. It has always been a kind of ferry boat operation, a metaphysical Uber. Whether we are ferrying tales across the Tigris or punchlines across TikTok, we are moving more than words. We are moving whole cosmologies. The journey from Sanskrit to Arabic to Hebrew to Latin to Italian is not just linguistic, it is civilizational. It is the record of human connectivity, cultural sedimentation, and narrative endurance. So let's return to the Panchatantra. Long before it inspired the Decameron through its wardrobe of linguistic disguises, it was entertaining children and advising kings in ancient India. It was teaching statecraft through animals, morals through humor, and somehow millennia later, it is whispering through Boccaccio. That's a world tour Beyonce might envy. What survives through this polyglot journey is not just plot. What survives is cultural DNA. Inscribed in metaphor, encrypted or inscribed in metaphor, morality, and mode of telling. A fable told by a jackal in Sanskrit becomes a tale of courtly intrigue in Italian, and yet the soul endures. Was something lost in all that translation? এটা মজার ব্যাপার হচ্ছে না, একটু বাংলায় বলি। মজার ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে যে ট্রান্সলেশন মানে এটা হচ্ছে আরবি থেকে হচ্ছে ফার্সিতে, ফার্সি থেকে হচ্ছে হ্যাঁ আরেকটা ভাষায়, ওখান থেকে হতে হতে 60টা সার্কিট দিয়ে ঘুরে এসছে ইউরোপে। এতে কি অনুবাদ আমরা যাকে বলছি, অনুবাদের বিশুদ্ধতাবাদীরা তো বলবে যে এটা কোথায় গেল, বলে হা হা করবে, চিৎকার করবে, কান্নাকাটি করবে যে কোথায় গেল। বিশুদ্ধতাবাদীরা তো ফ্যাসিবাদীও হয়, এটা তো জানেন আপনি। বিশুদ্ধতাবাদের সাথে ফ্যাসিবাদের যোগাযোগ আছে, সেটি আর এক আলোচনা। কিন্তু আপনারা লক্ষ্য করেন যে এই ডেকামেরনের এই জীবন, এটা ট্রান্সলেশনের জীবন, এটা ট্রান্সমাইগ্রেশনের জীবন, এটা ট্রাভেলের জীবন, এটা একটা ভাষা থেকে আরেকটা ভাষা থেকে আরেকটা ভাষা থেকে আরেকটা ভাষা। এখন কি বলা সম্ভব? আমরা কি বলবো যে ওয়াজ সামথিং লস্ট ইন অল দ্যাট ট্রান্সলেশন? শিওর, শিওর লস তো আছেই। নেমস চেঞ্জড, সেটিংস শিফটেড, ironies twisted, but as Salman Rushdie reminds us, something was gained too. Salman Rushdie এরকম একটা কথা ছিল, if something is lost in translation, something is also gained in translation. তাই না? আমরা তো এটা বলি, এটা ক্লিশের মতো দাঁড়িয়েছে যে আসলে ট্রান্সলেশন, সামথিং ইজ লস্ট ইন ট্রান্সলেশন। ওয়েল, সামথিং ইজ লস্ট ইন ট্রান্সলেশন, ট্রু। আপনি তো ট্রান্সলেশনে আপনি যতই বিশুদ্ধতাবাদী হন না কেন, যতই চেষ্টা করেন না কেন, আপনি মূল যেটা, সত্যি কথা বলতে কি, মূলকে কিন্তু আপনি একেবারে অ্যাকুরেটলি একটা আর একটা ভাষা নিতে পারবেন না, সম্ভব না, হিউম্যানলি ইম্পসিবল। এটা কিন্তু থিওরিটিক্যালি এটা বুঝতে হবে। তার অর্থ আবার এই না যে আপনি যেহেতু পসিবল না, আপনি আপনার মতো করে লিবার্টি নিয়ে দৌড়ালেন অন্যদিকে। লিবার্টি মানে কিন্তু রেসপন্সিবিলিটি না, ঠিক আছে? কিন্তু ওই বোধটা একটু আমি সঞ্চারিত করার চেষ্টা করছি যে মানে অনুবাদটা তো একটা অত্যন্ত জটিল এবং আনন্দের কাজ, দুটি, তাই না? এবং এই যে মুভমেন্টের কথা আগে বলছেন না, ট্রান্সলেশন ইস মুভমেন্ট, ইস ম্যাটাফার, ইস স্ট্রেপ, এটা তো বটেই। এবং এর মধ্যে কি হচ্ছে যে আমরা কিছু বর্জন মানে কিছু হারিয়ে যাচ্ছে ঠিকই, কিন্তু লাভও হচ্ছে, কিছু পাচ্ছিও ঠিক। সুতরাং এটা ওয়ান সাইডেড স্টোরি না, এটা ওয়ান সাইডেড লাভ অ্যাফেয়ার না। বলে না একদিকের প্রেম, যেটা আমার জীবনে ছিল একাধিকবার। একদিকে খালি ভালোবেসেছি কিন্তু কোনো রেসপন্স নাই, তো ওটা তো বেশি দূর এগোয় না, কিন্তু এটা একটা অ্যাক্ট, ঠিক আছে। কিন্তু ট্রান্সলেশন কিন্তু এক ওই ওয়ান সাইডেড প্রেমের মতো না, এটার মধ্যে ইন্টারাকশন থাকে। তো সুতরাং রুশদি তো ঠিকই বলেছে যে if something is lost in translation, something is gained in translation as well. Translation isn't a zero-sum game. It's jazz. The melody shifts, the notes improvise, the rhythm syncopates, but the soul continues to sing. এবার আরেকটু থামলাম, আমি আরো বিষয় আছে, আমি আরো বলবো। আমি তো ট্রান্সলেশনের যে কলোনিয়াল কারেন্সি আছে সেটা নিয়ে বলবো, আরো অনেক বিষয় আছে। তো আমি একটু থামলাম, কারণ থামাটা দরকার এই কারণে যে আপনাদের একটু ব্রেক দরকার বলে মনে হচ্ছে, কারণ এটা 1 ঘন্টা 11 মিনিট হয়ে গেছে। হ্যাঁ, কেমন, আমরা তো 2 ঘন্টা চালো, আরো আছে, সময় আছে। তো আপনারা 5 মিনিটের একটা ব্রেক নেন, নাকি নেওয়া যেতে পারে? আমরা 5 মিনিটের পরে আবার এখানে একত্র হয়ে, আমি মাঝে মাঝে বাংলা বললে তো আপনাদের কোনো অসুবিধা নেই নাকি? মাঝে মাঝে তো বাংলা, কারণ আপনারা তো বাঙালি। আমি তো সারা জীবন এখানে ইংরেজি বলতে হয়। হ্যাঁ, ইংরেজি বিভাগে পড়িয়েছি গত 27 বছর, 20 বছর, 27 বছর পড়িয়েছি আমেরিকায়, 27 বছর ছিলাম। তার মধ্যে মানে সনাতন ইংরেজি বিভাগে পড়িয়েছি প্রায় 20 বছরের মতো। হ্যাঁ, তো সুতরাং ইংরেজি বিভাগে পড়াতে হচ্ছে। তারপর আমি এখন ইন্টারডিসিপ্লিনারি স্টাডিজে আছি, কিন্তু আমার ছাত্রছাত্রীদের মধ্যে বাঙালিটা খুবই কম, নাই, ভারতীয় এখন নাই। তো বাংলা বলার আর সুযোগই হয় না এখানে। আমি গত 1 বছর খুব কম বাংলা মানে এখানে বলি, তো আপনাদেরকে একটু পেয়েছি বললাম আর কি। অসুবিধা আছে নাকি?
কোনো সমস্যা নেই স্যার।
কোনো অসুবিধা নেই স্যার, আপনার বাংলা
আমি বাংলা ভাষাটাকে খুব ভালোবাসি এবং এই ভাষাটাকে যতটা ভালোভাবে রপ্ত করা সম্ভব আমি সেটা করার চেষ্টা করেছি। সুতরাং সুযোগ পেলেই আমি এই বাংলায় কথা বলি। আমি নিজেও বাংলায় অনুবাদ করি। আমি তো অনুবাদ ইংরেজি থেকে বাংলা থেকে ইংরেজিতে যতটা না করেছি, ইংরেজি থেকে বাংলায় করেছি তার চেয়ে অনেক বেশি। হয়তো সময় পেলে আজকে আপনাদেরকে একটু অনুবাদ একটা আমি আমার নিজের অনুবাদও শোনাবো, অসুবিধা কি? কিন্তু আমরা এখন বলেন। সরি,
আপনার একটা বই আছে ওই যে ফিলোসফিক্যাল ন্যারেটিভস, ওটা বাংলা বই, আপনার রচনা আছে। আপনার একটা রচনাতে আপনি সম্ভবত থিয়েটার অ্যাডর্নো নিয়ে লিখেছিলেন, ওনার মিউজিক নিয়ে ওপিনিয়ন গুলো। ওটা কি
হ্যাঁ,
আপনার
হ্যাঁ।
সাথে আছে এই মুহূর্তে? মানে এখন না হলেও মানে পরে
বোধহয় আমার কাছে থাকতে পারে। আমার কি ওই বইটার কথা বলছে? আমার তো অ্যাডর্নোকে আমি তো একাধিক মাত্রায় এনগেজ করেছি। কেমন? অ্যাডর্নো আমার একজন প্রিয় মার্ক্সবাদী সংস্কৃতি তাত্ত্বিক, ইজ এ কালচারাল থিওরিস্ট। কালচার নিয়ে আমি যখন কথা বলি, অ্যাডর্নো প্রাসঙ্গিক হয়ে ওঠে। আমি আবার সঙ্গীতের ক্লাস পড়াই, হ্যাঁ? লিটারেচারে যেমন পড়াই, যে ক্লাসটা দিই টু গ্রেট ববস, বব মার্লি এবং বব ডিলান নিয়ে। এখানে পড়াই, মানে আমেরিকায়, মানে
জি।
আমার আন্ডার গ্র্যাজুয়েটদের পড়াই। তো ওখানে পড়াতে গেলে অ্যাডর্নোর যে সঙ্গীত সংক্রান্ত কাজ আছে সেটা ব্যবহার করি, একাধিকবার করেছি। তখন এগুলো এনগেজ করি। আমার ওই বইয়ের কথা কি বলছেন? চিহ্ন ভাষায় অবশেষে বলে একটা বই আছে। সেই বইতে আমি তো অ্যাডর্নো ব্যবহার করেছি, কবিতা ব্যবহার করেছি, অনুবাদ ব্যবহার করেছি। ইটস এ মিক্সড জনরা বুক। মানে জনরাটা এমন যে এটার মধ্যে ভ্রমণ কাহিনী আছে, কিন্তু মূলত ভ্রমণ কাহিনী, কিন্তু ভ্রমণের ভেতর দিয়ে থিওরাইজেশন আছে। ক্রিটিফিকশন বলে। ক্রিটিফিকশন হচ্ছে ক্রিটিসিজম এবং ফিকশন যখন একসঙ্গে আসে এবং তাদের মধ্যে ভেদরেখা যখন বিলুপ্ত হয়, তখন এটাকে বলা হয় ক্রিটিফিকশন। মানে ক্রিটিসিজম এবং ফিকশন কাছাকাছি আসে, মানে একই মিলেমিশে থাকে। যেমন ক্রিটিফিকশনের উদাহরণ দেওয়া যায়, আমি যে আপনারা হয়তো দেখেছেন এই কাজটা, নাম হচ্ছে ফুকোস পেন্ডুলাম, লিখেছেন উম্বের্তো একো। উম্বের্তো একো ফুকোস পেন্ডুলাম লিখেছেন, এবং ফুকোস পেন্ডুলাম হচ্ছে আপনার ক্রিটিফিকশন। বা দেখবেন যে ঘটনা আছে, কাহিনী আছে, বলতে বলতে দেখা গেল যে শুরু হলো থিওরাইজেশন, শুরু হলো সাহিত্য সমালোচনা। ওর ভেতরে ওগুলো সব বুনে দিচ্ছে পরস্পর ভাবে। এটা ক্রিটিফিকশন। তো আমার এই বইটা চিহ্ন ভাষায় অবশেষে এটা ট্রাভেলগ। It is a travelogue, critifiction, a work of critifiction, and also docufiction all at once. এটা মিক্সড জনরা বই। এটা হচ্ছে চিহ্ন ভাষায় অবশেষে। এবং সেই বইয়ে আমি অ্যাডর্নো সম্পর্কে কথা বলেছি, বেঞ্জামিন সম্পর্কে। বেঞ্জামিনকে আসলে উচ্চারণ করে বেনিয়ামিন, বাল্টার বেনিয়ামিন। আমার বন্ধু এবং সহকর্মী সলিমুল্লাহ খান, আমার ভাই, উনি বলে যে না, বেনিয়ামিন বলার দরকার। তা আমি মনে করি যে হ্যাঁ, বলা দরকার, তো নাম উচ্চারণ। কিন্তু চেনার স্বার্থে অনেক সময় প্রচলিত নাম ব্যবহার করা অত খারাপ না। আমি অত বিশুদ্ধতাবাদী না, কারণ চেনার স্বার্থে এটা দরকার। যেমন আমার একটা সময় গেছে যখন এরকম হয়েছিল, আমি ঢাকা থেকে ঢাকায় ফিরেছি পিএইচডি করে, ফিরে নতুন এই 2000 আপনার কত সাল হবে, 7 সালের দিকে। তখন আমি বিজুর দোকানে যাই, বুক স্টোরে গিয়ে আমি একটা বই দেখি, বইটার উপর নামে লেখা আছে প্লাটন। তো প্লাটনকে আমি তো ভাবলাম যে এটা তো নাম শুনি নাই জীবনে। তো আমার তখন এখনো এই আগ্রহ, আমি যার নাম শুনে নাই সেইটা আমি একটু এক্সপ্লোর করার চেষ্টা করি। আমি বইটা আগ্রহ সহকারে নিলাম হাতে এবং খুলে দেখলাম যে আসলে এটা প্লেটো নিয়ে কথা বলা হচ্ছে। প্লেটোর নাম হচ্ছে প্লাটন হয়ে গেছে। তো প্লাটন নাম, যে সারা জীবন প্লাটন নাম শুনে নাই, তখন আমি যদি প্লাটন না বলে প্লেটো বলি, ধরেন ওই যে প্র্যাগম্যাটিক্স এর কথা আছে না, ট্রান্সলেশনেরও তো প্র্যাগম্যাটিক্স আছে, তাই না? তো আপনি যদি ক্ষেত্র বিশেষে আপনার মানুষকে বোঝানোর স্বার্থে আপনার প্লেটো বললে অসুবিধা কি? অসুবিধা তো নাই। তো সেই কারণে আমি বেঞ্জামিন বলছি, বেনিয়ামিন না, নাইবা বলতাম বাল্টার। তার নাম হচ্ছে জার্মানে, আপনি যদি উচ্চারণ করতে চান তাহলে তার নাম হয় এরকম, শুনেছি। কারণ আমি জার্মান ভাষাটা জানি না, অন্যান্য ভাষা জানি, ল্যাটিন কিছু জানি, কিন্তু জার্মান জানি না। আরবি জানি, একটু ফার্সি একটু শিখেছিলাম, সংস্কৃত কিছু শিখেছিলাম, কিন্তু এই যে জার্মান তো আর শেখা হয় না। একটু এদিক সেদিক, ওটা তো আর জানা বলে না। তো সুতরাং জানি না, কিন্তু শুনেছি, বুঝেছি যতটুকু, সেটা হবে বাল্টার বেনিয়ামিন। বাল্টার বেনিয়ামিন, ওয়াল্টার বেনিয়ামিন না বলে আমরা ওখানেও একটা ট্রান্সলেশন হচ্ছে আর কি। আমি যদি ওয়াল্টার বেঞ্জামিন বলি এবং তাতে যদি কেউ বোঝে, আমেরিকার তো এমনি ইংরেজি বিভাগে বা ইন্টারডিসিপ্লিনারি স্টাডিজ বিভাগে এখানে ওয়াল্টার বেঞ্জামিন বলে, অত কায়দা করে বাল্টার বেনিয়ামিন বলে না। যেমন গেটে বলতে গিয়ে যদি আপনি এরকম ভাবে যদি করেন, তখন তো অনেক সময় মানুষজন ঘাবড়ে যায় যে এটা কোত্থেকে কি হলো। এখানেও মজার ব্যাপার আছে, ভেরি কমিক, ইজন্ট ইট? তো এইটা, এবং এটাও কি, এগুলো সবই কিন্তু পলিটিক্যাল, এগুলো নিয়ে আমি আলাপ করবো পরে। তো ওই যে 5 মিনিটের যে ব্রেকের কথা বলেছিলাম, সেটার কথা কিন্তু আমি ভুলে যাই নাই, অসুবিধা নেই, আমরা নেই এখন 5 মিনিট, তারপর আবার শুরু করবো।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
দেখি অ্যাডর্নো সম্পর্কে আপনি কি ফিলসফিক্যাল ন্যারেটিভস বলতে আরেকটা বই আছে, সেটার নাম দর্শনাখ্যান। দর্শনাখ্যানের কথা বলছেন? হ্যাঁ, ওইখানেও আছে। হ্যাঁ, বইটা আছে আমার এখানে। কেন, কিছু বলবেন আমাকে? কিছু বলতে বলবেন?
না স্যার, আপনি বলেছেন একটা স্পেসিফিক রচনায় ওটা লেখা আছে, তো জাস্ট নামটা বললে আমার কাছে, আমার বাসায় বই আছে। মানে আপনার যেসব বই রকমারিতে আছে আমার সবগুলোই বাসায় আছে, তাহলে আমি স্পেসিফিকলি
তাই
ওয়েবসাইটে
নাকি?
গিয়ে পড়তে
আচ্ছা আবরার, আমি তো তো জানি না, আপনি তো অত্যন্ত একজন গুরুত্বপূর্ণ পাঠক বলে মনে হচ্ছে আমার কাছে। আমার বই আপনি রেখেছেন, ধন্যবাদ।
জি স্যার, অবশ্যই। আর আপনি তো গত বছর এটা নিয়ে কথা বলেছেন, so আমি চেষ্টা করছি ফলো আপ করতে আর কি।
গত বছর কোথায় কথা বলেছি এটা নিয়ে? আমি ওই
স্যার এটা
টেলিভিশন
ইউলাবে বলেছিলেন। জি জি। আপনি তো
ইউল্যাবে বলেছি।
এই সেশনটায় মানে গত বছর হিউমার নিয়ে নিয়েছিলেন, সো ওই একটা 10 মিনিট ব্রেক ছিল,
ও,
তখন আপনার সাথে
হিউমার
কথা
ছিল
হয়েছে।
গত বছর, আমি ভুলে গেছি। গত বছর তো হিউমার। আই রিয়েলি এনজয়েড দ্যাট সেশন এন্ড ইউ আর দেয়ার, আবরার।
জি স্যার, টেরি ইগলটন নিয়ে আমরা কথা
আমার
বলেছিলাম।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, now you were there and your participation was remarkable, and now I recall. I'm sorry, আমি ক্যাচ আপ করতে একটু দেরি হয়ে গেছে। সরি আবরার, বাট ইয়েস, ইউ আর দেয়ার, and now আমি সমস্ত কিছু এখন মনে পড়ছে। থ্যাংক ইউ। Now I want to talk about translation as colonial currency. In fact, I want to complicate certain things. Not that it's important to complicate things all the time, but translation is not just a bridge. Sometimes it can be a bulldozer. It has been used historically as a tool of empire, a method of appropriation, and a way to recode indigenous texts into digestible, depoliticized forms. The French literary critic Pascal Casanova, in the book is called the World Republic of Letters, reminds us, the global literary system mimics the world capitalist economy. Translation in this system is rarely neutral. It is a practice shaped by symbolic capital, prestige politics, and marketplace power. So translation then is unequal exchange, asymmetrical transfer. It is where, for instance, Bangla gets translated into English and marketed as exotic, but rarely do English texts get translated into Chakma or Mro or Santal. This, friends, is not an accident. It is structure. And yet another French figure, the French sociologist of knowledge and cultural theorist Pierre Bourdieu would say the global literary field is structured like the capitalist market, with dominant literatures enjoying the full flow of exchange, while dominated literatures remain translators, importers, adapters, rarely exporters. It is why Ngugi wa Thiong'o, whom I mentioned earlier, once famously refused to write in English. Why he calls for translation not as submission, but as resistance. For Ngugi, translation becomes a way to return the gaze, to provincialize the imperial language, and revalorize the mother tongues long suppressed. He puts it bluntly, and I remember this quote very well. He puts it very interestingly: monolingualism is carbon monoxide, multilingualism is oxygen. That's Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I would only add, translation is the ventilation system. Now, what really happens if we, for instance, bring together this intellectual heavyweights, Pascal Casanova, Pierre Bourdieu, and the American sociologist and world systems theorist Immanuel Wallerstein? A resonant and disquieting idea emerges. Translation does not float freely in a world of frictionless equal exchanges. It is enmeshed structurally, historically, and ideologically in what Casanova famously calls the World Republic of Letters, which, despite its lofty name, bears a striking resemblance to the UN Security Council, a supposedly universal arena governed by a few dominant players, while the rest must knock politely, wait endlessly, or never get admitted at all. So in this literary world system, if you will, English is translated from a sign of its cultural dominance and global exportability. French, with its historical prestige and enduring symbolic capital, is often translated into, especially in academic and literary circles eager for the gloss of European sophistication. But Bangla is asked to wait outside or to take the service entrance, if you will. Or worse, it's never even on the map. Unless, of course, Tagore is being curated, curated for the world stage, usually through W.B. Yeats's mediating pen, or Nazrul is selectively quoted in anthologies edited by those unfamiliar with the sonic and semantic velocity and verb of his verse. And this is not merely a case of cultural oversight, it's a matter of global hierarchy. The logic that underpins this uneven flow of translation is not a neutral or innocent one. It is the logic of the market, what I prefer to call commodified meaning making. In this marketplace, texts are traded not just for their content, but their cultural capital, for their cultural capital. Who gets translated? How? And by whom? Depends on who is seen as a worthy investment, who has the value in the global economy of prestige and recognition. Take, for example, the case of the late Mahmoud Darwish, my favorite poet, the Palestinian national poet. His works are now widely translated, yes, but most often by Western presses that market his poetry as emblematic of, within quotation marks, Middle Eastern suffering, packaging resistance in palatable doses for liberal consumption. Or consider the Chilean poet Raul Jurita, whose visceral landscape-scorched verses have gained visibility in the Anglophone world only after decades of political struggle and selective translation. Even then, the politics of selection, which is rendered into English, what is left out is rarely innocent. And let's not forget the feminist Ghanaian writer, Ama Ata Aidu, whose searing critiques of colonialism and patriarchy, are rarely encountered in translation outside Anglophone Africa, even though she wrote in English herself. Mark this. Why? Because Africa, when it enters the global literary market, is often filtered through narratives of trauma, war, or exoticism. Joy, resistance, satire, those are harder sells. As Lawrence Venuti, the American translation theorist, historian, and translator, has tirelessly insisted the translator is not merely invisible, they're made invisible. Translators are made invisible, not by magic, but by ideology. Not by magic, but by ideology. So I talked about the Ghanaian writer, Ama Ata Aidu, and her critiques, and then, what happens when her work enters the global literary market, and how it is often filtered through certain kinds of narratives, for instance, narratives of trauma, war, or exoticism, or joy, resistance, satire, all those things are harder sells. And then I mentioned Venuti. I want to take up Venuti more, because this American translation theorist, historian, and translator, as I mentioned, I've already mentioned him, has tirelessly insisted on the invisibility of the translator, not by my last statement, was this. I ended by saying that, translators are made invisible not by magic, but by ideology. Invisible by ideology, made invisible, not by magic, but by ideology. And the translator is expected to be a ghost, if you will. Ghost, indispensable, yet erased. Hard, but never acknowledged. Why? Because in the reigning ideology of authorship, the original is genius, inspiration, originality. The translator is labor, repetition, reproduction. And labor under capitalism is always already devalued, mystified, or disappeared, something Karl Marx theorized with unmatched rigor and richness and clarity in his magnum opus, Das Kapital or Capital, where Marx demystifies or unmasks the capitalist mode of production as a system premised on the erasure of labor's very visibility. We see this erasure in the publishing industry today. Translators often, don't get cover credits even. Their names appear, if at all, in small print, tucked away in a preface or copyright page. Reviewers then praise the style of the author while ignoring the fact that the words the words they are admiring were in fact rendered by another's hand, by someone negotiating two linguistic worlds, two cultural systems, two ontologies. So the politics of translation is never just about crossing language. It is about navigating and often resisting systems of power, prestige, profit, and disappearance. It is about who gets to speak globally and who gets to be footnoted, who enters the canon and who lingers in the lobby, who is celebrated as a world author and who is confined to regional relevance. Translation then is not just linguistic transfer, again, it is world making, world breaking, and world rewriting. Now, let me further take up Venuti's ideas. Venuti, Venuti, and Venuti's book, it's a remarkable book. I mean, he has been working in the area of translation for such a long time. He's an American. I met him once. So Venuti, offers us the metaphor of this invisible translator. He also, interestingly, this is very interesting, he mobilizes a critique, quite a critique, of the idea that good translation must be smooth, seamless, unnoticeable. You see, just another school of thought here. That he criticizes the idea that good translation must be smooth or seamless, unnoticeable, right? But this fluency, Venuti, contends, is itself ideological. It hides the translator's labor. It domesticates the foreign. It makes the reader forget they're reading something once said differently, and that Venuti insists is a kind of cultural laundering, like money laundering. And Venuti's solution? He uses this term, foreignization. Leave the texture of the source. Let the cultural grit remain. Let the target language feel the jolt of the other. As someone who grew up listening to Rabindranath Tagore in Bangla and then encountered the sanitized W.B. Yeats translations of his poetry in English, some kind of, I can testify something was cleaned that shouldn't have been, something raw was rendered polite, the tiger was turned into a house rat. Damn. Okay, so that's Venuti. True. Venturi, from his liberal humanist position, pays attention to the question of the politics of translation, if not its political economy. While he seems to be relatively silent regarding the questions of linguistic imperialism and cultural imperialism, historically produced configurations of unequal power relations that are by no means dead in the post-pandemic global conjuncture now. Configurations that continue to affect one way or another the circulation, exchange, consumption, and distribution of literary and cultural productions, translations included. In fact, the literary, the cultural, and the translational are all profoundly interconnected or even interspliced, such that the borders and boundaries between them begin to blur or even dissolve, given that literary translation itself becomes part of literature, while, of course, literature itself is always subsumed under the category of culture in the Raymond Williamsian sense. Now, these are precisely some of the issues and concerns that the Kenyan novelist, playwright, theorist, activist Ngugi wa Thiong'o recently brought up in his latest book that I already mentioned. Again, the title of the book is The Language of Languages, Reflections on Translation. In fact, Ngugi, let me put it this way, Ngugi enacts a dialectic of strategic binarism by even putting bluntly towards the beginning of this book this very idea. And I'm trying to recall these ideas. There are two ways by which different languages and cultures relate to one another. One way, hierarchies of unequal power relations. Let's call it the imperial way. And another way is a network of equal give and take, the democratic way. So you have this imperial way and you have this democratic way. While Ngugi also suggests that the imperial logic has been dominant one in the relationship between languages. All right. Historically and otherwise, this has indeed been the case. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is far from being a simple binarist, though. Rather, he is a strategic one. At the same time, he remains keenly aware of the overdetermined complexities surrounding the language question, zeroing in on how imperial logic or reason has been internalized by the natives themselves. In the context of Bangladesh, the issue extends far beyond the tensions between English and Bangla. And this is something that I've long been interested in. These tensions, you go beyond the tensions between English and Bangla. Consider the many marginalized, indigenous, tribal, and minority languages spoken across the country. We should talk about this more and more, I think. In fact, Mandi, Chakma, Mro, Santal, Laleng, also known as Patra, Kashi, Hajong, Koch, Dalu, and some others like Vishnupriya, Manipuri, Lushai, Kora, you just go on and on. Koda, Oraon, Munda, Kharia, Mahali, etc. Gonju Singh, and Munda I mentioned, and born children are told every day by the state that their mother tongue is Bangla. But this is far from true. Have there been what Ngugi calls networks of equal give and take in terms of translation between Bangla and other marginalized languages? Have there been those networks of equal give and take in terms of translation between Bangla and other marginalized languages? Very little, if any. This absence itself constitutes a form of violence, one that Ngugi highlights when discussing the quasi-Kantian imperial reason, an ideology that translates into hegemony in precisely the Gramscian sense. In this post-July uprising conjuncture in 2025, yes, today, in times of state reform and restructuring, I think it is imperative to rethink the state through the lens of the language question. Among other things, doing so is essential if we are to avoid what could be aptly termed linguistic fascism. Now, Ngugi himself charts certain contours of linguistic fascism, although he does not directly deploy the term. And mark what he says, and let me quote here. He says, arranged in a hierarchy of unequal power relationships, the imperial way, language produces catastrophe. Monolingualism, setting itself on the top of hierarchy, suffocates the subordinate languages and cultures, but arranged in a network of equal give and take, the democratic way, languages give life to each other. To sum up, monolingualism is the carbon monoxide. I know this one. Monolingualism is the carbon monoxide of cultures. Multilingualism is the oxygen, unquote. So, and then defining translation as the language of languages, the common language of languages, Ngugi emphatically maintains Translation is one of the means by which language and cultures do and can give life to each other. They enable the network of equal give and take the democratic way. But I argue that you cannot establish this genuinely democratic way without unsettling and even dismantling both the macrologics and micrologics of capital that brutally, scandalously more creative works, including works of translations, into exchange values, into mere commodities of which even Shakespeare, even back in the 17th century, was even aware. Mark then some of Shakespeare's lines from his play called King John. Mad world, this is from Shakespeare. Mad composition, that smooth-faced gentleman tickling commodity, the bias of the world. The world who of itself, poised well, made to run even upon even ground, till this advantage, this vile drawing bias, this sway of motion, this commodity. So Ngugi wa Thiong'o, I think, cuts deeper still. He actually offers a revolutionary frame. Either language relates as empires do through domination, or they relate as equals through translation. Monolingualism, let me repeat, is the carbon monoxide of culture. Multilingualism is oxygen. I would say translation is the respirator. Now, this democratic vision of translation sounds beautiful, but we must recognize its impediments. The state in Bangladesh, in the US, everywhere, performs what I call linguistic triage, saving some tongues, discarding others. Tribal, indigenous, and minority languages are often amputated. For efficiency, the dominant language is declared the language of unity, progress, even patriotism, while the others are quietly euthanized. That is not translation, that is linguistic fascism. Any questions?
Sir, I have a question.
Sure.
Sir, you were talking about how the translator remains invisible and how Venuti suggests foreignization. So, sir, when we read Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, we knew it's a translation and we read it as such, but we never ultimately thought about the translator. And even when in last year, vegetarian was one had on the Nobel Prize, people said that it's not the same as the actual Korean one. So even when the translators they create something very foreign, we understand that it's not translation. We ultimately do not look for the translator. So my question is, এইরকম যে সমস্যাগুলো হয় সেখানে আমরা ট্রান্সলেটর হিসেবে আলটিমেটলি কিভাবে নিজেদের মার্ক বা নিজেদের লেবারকে ভ্যালিউ দিতে পারি যখন হচ্ছে জানা সত্ত্বেও আমরা আসলে সেটাকে ওইভাবে দেখতেছি না। ট্রান্সলেটরের যে পজিশন সেটাকে আমরা কখনোই আসলে ওইভাবে ভ্যালু করি না আলটিমেটলি, কারণ আলটিমেটলি আমরা পড়ার সময়টা মার্কেজের রাইটিং হিসেবেই পড়ছি বা হাংকাং এর রাইটিং হিসেবেই পড়ছি। সো ফরেনাইজেশন আলটিমেটলি কতটুকু হেল্পফুল একটা ট্রান্সলেটরের মার্ক রাখার জন্য? দ্যাট ওয়াজ মাই কোয়েশ্চেন স্যার।
খুব ভালো প্রশ্ন এবং খুব ভালো অবজারভেশন। আসলেই তো তাই, আমরা তো দেখেছি, লক্ষ্য করেছি যে আমরা যখন কোনো অনুবাদের কাজ পড়ি তখন অনুবাদ আমরা মনে করি যে ভালো অনুবাদ যদি আরো ভালো হয়, অনুবাদের যদি খুবই ভালো হয় তাহলে তাকে আমরা আরো বেশি ভুলে যাই। অনুবাদ খারাপ হলে আমরা বরঞ্চ দেখি এটা কে অনুবাদ করেছে রে, এরকম একটা খারাপ অনুবাদ। অনুবাদ যদি ভালো হয় তখন আমরা তো অনুবাদককে ভুলে যাই। কারণ গাব্রিয়েল গার্সিয়া মার্কেজের বিশেষ করে 100 Years of Solitude এর অনুবাদ কিন্তু দুর্দান্ত অনুবাদ, এবং এই অনুবাদ পড়তে গিয়ে আমরা তো ভুলেই যাই যে কে অনুবাদ করেছে। এখন যদি আমাকেও জিজ্ঞাসা করা হয়, আমি তো নামও তো মনে নাই যে কে অনুবাদক। তাই যে এই যে ভুলে থাকাটা, এটা আদর্শিকভাবে নিরীহ কোনো বিষয় না, রাজনৈতিকভাবে নিরীহ কোনো বিষয় না। কারণ আমরা আমাদের মাথার মধ্যে দীর্ঘ সময় ধরে ঢুকিয়ে রেখেছি যে হচ্ছে অনুবাদকরা হচ্ছে পরগাছা। অনুবাদ মানে হচ্ছে পরগাছার কাজ। পরগাছাদের ওদেরকে ওরা সেকেন্ডারি, ওরা হচ্ছে সেকেন্ড রেট, এবং বলেন অনেক সময় থার্ড ক্লাস সিটিজেন। ওরা সিটিজেন ঠিকই আছে কিন্তু থার্ড ক্লাস, কিন্তু আসল হচ্ছে লেখক। এই যে ধারণাটা, এটা তো আমাদের মাথার মধ্যে যুগের পর যুগ এটা তো আছেই। এবং তারপরে যদি আবার অনুবাদ ভালো হয়, তখন তো আরো বেশি ভুলে যাই। তো এই একটা প্যারাডক্সও আছে কিন্তু। তখন আমরা খেয়াল করি না যে কে, আমরা মনে করি এটাই। এটার মূল কারণটা আমি মনে করি হচ্ছে এটা। তৃষা না? আপনার তৃষাই তো প্রশ্নটা করলো আমাকে নাকি?
জি স্যার, তৃষা।
হ্যাঁ, তৃষা এটার একটা কারণ, মূল কারণ, একটা মূল কারণ, একমাত্র কারণ না হলেও যে আমরা যুগের পর যুগ, সময়ের পর সময় আমরা এটা ভেবে বসে আছি। আমাদের মাথার মধ্যে এই ধারণাটা ঢুকে আছে। মানে আমরা একটা ইন্টারনালাইজ করেছি এমন একটা ভ্যালু। আমরা শিখেছি এমন একটা ভ্যালু যেখানে আমরা ট্রান্সলেশনকে মর্যাদা দিতে শেখিনি। গ্রামসি বলে এটাকে hegemony। হ্যাঁ? So we have been hegemonized into believing that the translation doesn't exist when it's good translation. তাই না? এইটা একটা কারণ। এইজন্য যেটা দরকার আমাদের সেটাই, সেইজন্য সচেতন আনলার্নিং এটা দরকার। অনেক থিওরিস্টরা বলেছে না, লার্নিং তো দরকার। লার্নিং মানেও কিন্তু আবার আনলার্নিং ও। লার্নিং ইনভলভস আনলার্নিং। লার্নিং ইজ a process that involves unlearning and relearning. তো আনলার্নিং এর ব্যাপারে যখন আসে তখন আমাদেরকে এটা তো করতে হবে। আমরা যা শিখেছি এতদিন যে এটা ট্রান্সলেটরকে একটা দ্বিতীয় শ্রেণীর মনে করা, এই শেখাটা আমরা যদি বর্জন করি, অনেক সময় বর্জন করতে হয়। তো অনেক ধারণা বর্জন করতে হয়, অনেক ধারণাকে গ্রহণ করতে হয়। তাহলে এটি কি দাঁড়ায় ব্যাপারটা? ব্যাপারটা দাঁড়ায় এটা হচ্ছে একটা লার্নিং প্রসেস, কালচারাল প্রসেস, কালচারাল লার্নিং, সাংস্কৃতিক অনুশীলন। সাংস্কৃতিক অনুশীলন ব্যতিরেকে আপনার কোনো ধারণা একটা সমাজে পোক্ত হয় না বা একটা সমাজে তার গ্রহণযোগ্যতা অর্জন করে না। সে কারণে আমি তো সবসময় বলি যে আমাদের যে রাজনৈতিক লড়াই চলে একদিকে সেটা তো জরুরি, কিন্তু আমাদের তার সাথে দরকার সাংস্কৃতিক লড়াই। ধরেন আপনি একটা সমাজকে পাল্টাতে চান, সেক্ষেত্রে আপনার সাংস্কৃতিক লড়াই দরকার। কারণ আপনার আইডিয়াস, নতুন আইডিয়াস দরকার। যে আইডিয়াস গুলো ধরেন মানুষের মুক্তিকামী রাজনীতির কথাই যদি বলেন, তাহলে মানুষের মুক্তির বিষয় সম্পর্কিত বিভিন্ন ধারণা, বিভিন্ন গান, কবিতা, গল্প বা অন্যান্য অনুশীলন। সংস্কৃতি মানে কেবল গান, কবিতা এবং স্থাপত্য এবং এগুলো নয়। সংস্কৃতি হচ্ছে, আমি এইভাবে ডিফাইন করি, যাপিত জীবনের তাবৎ অনুশীলনের সমগ্র। তো এই সাংস্কৃতিক লড়াইটা দরকার। এই সাংস্কৃতিক লড়াইয়ের অন্তর্গত এই আইডিয়াটা দ্বিতীয় শ্রেণীর কোনো অর্গাস্টারও ব্যাপার ট্রান্সলেশন। কারণ যে লেখক, ভালো একজন লেখক, খুবই ভালো লেখক, তাকে ট্রান্সলেট করতে বলেন, সে নাও পারতে পারে। ট্রান্সলেশন, হ্যাঁ, সে কিন্তু নাও পারতে পারে। অনেক ভালো লেখক আছে ট্রান্সলেট করতে। যেমন শামসুর রহমান, আমার একসময় তার সাথে কথা হতো, উনি কবিতা ট্রান্সলেশন করেছেন কিছু। কবি হিসেবে কবিরা ভালো ট্রান্সলেট করে, তার একটা ইতিহাস আছে। কিন্তু শামসুর রহমান অর্থেই না যে সবচেয়ে ভালো ট্রান্সলেটর। ওনার তো রবার্ট ফ্রস্টের কবিতা ট্রান্সলেশন, এগুলো তো আমার কাছে খুব একটা ভালো মনে হয় না। অনেকের কাছেও তাই, আমি শুনেছি আমার বন্ধু বান্ধবের কাছেও থেকে তাদের প্রতিক্রিয়া। সুতরাং ট্রান্সলেশনকে মর্যাদা দেওয়ার জন্য যে ধারণাটা, সেই ধারণাটাকে সামনে আনতে হবে বারবার। আপনারা, আমরা সবাই মিলে এটা সামনে আনলেই এটা হবে। এই জন্য ট্রান্সলেশন স্টাডিজ হয়েছে। এই জন্য ওই যে ইনভিজিবিলিটি অফ দিস ট্রান্সলেটর, এই আইডিয়াটা নিয়ে কথা বলা হচ্ছে। সুতরাং আগের তুলনায় একটু বেশি অ্যাটেনশন দেওয়া হচ্ছে। আগে তো ট্রান্সলেশন স্টাডিজ বলে কোনো সাবজেক্টই ছিল না। এখন তো সেটা এসছে, কিছুটা প্রোগ্রেস হয়েছে অবশ্যই বলতে হয়, কিন্তু এটি যথেষ্ট না। এবার আমাকে একটু শেষ করতে হবে, মাত্র 6 মিনিট আছে। 6 মিনিটে আমি আরেকটু বাংলাদেশ সম্পর্কে বলি যে ইন বাংলাদেশ উই অফটেন স্পিক rightfully and proudly of the language movement of 1952, right? Of Bangla as Matribhasha, as mother tongue, as identity, as soil, as struggle, as blood. We honor the martyrs of Ekuche with solemn rituals, right? And rhetorical flourishes. And yes, we must. But even as we commemorate that historic defiance against linguistic imposition, we routinely forget or choose to ignore the dozens of other tongues spoken across the land. And I have mentioned a number of languages already. I have provided you with quite a list, already. And let's not forget that, let's not say that these are just dialects. These are not dialects. These are not dialects. These are not deviations. These are living, breathing languages, each carrying centuries of memory, metaphor, rhythm, and worldview. And yet the same state that mythologizes its origin in a language struggle. আমি কিন্তু ভাষা আন্দোলন নিয়ে অনেক গবেষণা করার চেষ্টা করেছি, লিখেছিও ভাষা আন্দোলন নিয়ে। The same state that mythologizes its origin in a language struggle tells these children as I've already told you, often cruelly, I would say cruelly and bureaucratically, that their real mother tongue is Bangla. তাদের তো মাতৃভাষা বাংলা না। তাদেরকে শেখানো হচ্ছে যে কি অবস্থা একটা, তাদের নাকি বাংলা মাতৃভাষা, that their own language is illegitimate, ungrammatical, unwritten, without history, without value, without anything. This is called violent, evacuation. This is called also violent epistemicide. It's epistemic violence, that it has no place in education, no presence in public media, no right to be read, recorded, or remembered. This is not translation. This is not dialogue. This is coercion. This is epistemicide, which can be as worse as genocide, or one can call it linguisticide. Linguisticide, another term, linguisticide, which can be as worse as genocide, because linguisticide involves the erasure of entire linguistic and cultural universes under the banner of national unity. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, again, I keep returning to Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o has a term for this. He has a term for this. The internalization of imperial reason. It is the process by which colonial hierarchies of language continue to operate under new flags and faces in so-called post-colonial states. I would go even further. I will call this linguistic fascism, a term that I already introduced. The denial of someone's language is not just symbolic violence, it is structural, educational, emotional, and epistemic violence all at once. It denies not only the right to speak, but the right to know and be known. Mark this. True translation, a radical decolonial translation, would mean creating actual networks of exchange and reciprocity. It would mean respecting minoritized languages not as folkloric curiosities or museum pieces, but as equal participants in the nation's linguistic ecology. It would require an infrastructure of mutuality, textbooks in Santali, radio broadcasts in Chakma, poetry festivals in Mro, state exams in Hajong. Why not? Translation should not flow only in one direction, from the periphery into the center, from the minor into the major, from the tribal tongue into the national one. But that, so far, has been the norm in Bangladesh. No reciprocity, no return, no resistance, at least not institutionally. But perhaps resistance is emerging at the grassroots, in oral archives, in community schools, in protest songs, in small acts of writing, reciting, remembering. Perhaps true translation, the kind that resists erasure and reclaims space, is already underway, quietly but defiantly. Now I will conclude. I have only 1 minute. But there is hope. But there is hope and humor and poetry. Let me end with Octavio Paz, whose words breathe life into this whole endeavor. Here is Octavio Paz, himself a translator, poet, and diplomat. He writes, to translate, and I'm quoting from Octavio Paz's poem on translation, to translate is to write, but to write the world anew, not fidelity, but fire. Translation, then, is not about being faithful. It is about being transformative. It is not about copying. It is about kindling something in another language, something new, something luminous, something that burns. So the next time you translate or read a translation, ask yourself, is this a mirror or a mosaic, a duplication or a detonation, a replica or a rebellion? Because in the end, translation is not just the art of carrying across, it is the art of carrying otherwise. Translation, then, is the most hopeful of human gestures. It says, I believe you are worth understanding. It says, your difference doesn't scare me. It intrigues me. If I bungle a phrase or accidentally resurrect your ancestors with a bottle of Pepsi along the way, well, maybe they will forgive me. But in a world as unequal, multilingual, and ideologically congested as ours, translation remains one of the most radical, messy, hopeful things we can do. And yes, in the end, translation is about trying. It's about trying. It is about trying to love, trying to listen, trying to stretch the self across the gulf of otherness. And if that is not revolutionary, I don't know what it is. What is? Let's do it wisely and let's do it with fire. Thank you. I'm done. I've taken already more than 1 hour. The fact remains that we lost some time at the beginning. So maybe you can hang around. Can you be with me for another 5 to 10 minutes? I want to talk
Yes,
Of course,
sir.
sir.
questions and answers. We can have a kind of question and answer session right now. Or you can make comments, observations, any ideas you want to share with me. You're very welcome. I can respond to those ideas, so on and so forth. So let's have some conversation now. But thanks for listening and patience. I've talked quite a bit, I think.
Sir, I had one observation to share. So after listening to this wonderful session, I have a different approach towards translation in a particular aspect. I was scared of foreignization. Like whenever I try to translate, I feel like it doesn't flow well. It sounds clunky or whatever. But as I said, we can't avoid the politics of translation. And especially when I am translating quote unquote a minority language, it truly is, as you said, linguisticide or epistemicide, because it's just not like erasure of languages, it's erasure of lives and lived experiences. So foreignization is just not an option there. It's appearing to be a must while I'm translating, and to respect and to vocalize those experiences and give them space in the language I'm translating. So thank you, sir, for that discussion. Really enjoyed that part, and I think it truly enlightened me in one way.
Thank you, Nasib. Thank you much for your observation and for your kind words. And now Avrar, you want to say something? And let me respond to Nasib a little bit. The translation, that's one idea, like you were talking about Venutri. That's just one particular approach where he wants us to make translation rough and not hide this labor and so on and so forth. That's one approach. You don't have to just uncritically celebrate him either. If you want to be critical of him, of course it should be. I just wanted to bring that different idea to the table. It's not that I totally endorse his idea. You see? That's what I'm saying. I, for one, think that art lies in concealing art. I believe in that. Horace, remember,
Yes, sir.
I quoted Horace at the beginning. I invoked him. You should translate in ways in which your labor, I mean, the labor that you have put into it is, its signs are erased. It's inevitable.
Yes, sir.
You have to hide the signs of your labor, though. That's what I believe in, because the question of readability, the question of aesthetics are also important. You cannot just make, well, I want to make it as staccato, as labor ridden as possible, and then you move in that direction relentlessly. That might not work. Talika?
Yeah, so I would actually like to thank you. Initially, since it's like I just woke up and started with the lecture, so the first 10 minutes was very overwhelming. But after
Understandable.
that, I was just like given the opportunity to look into a different horizons of like translation, and I am really grateful for that to you. One thing that actually struck my mind while you were talking about global hierarchy or the state hierarchy of like language politics and translation politics, like who is going to be globally celebrated, that made me think like how we always talk about literature from Rabindranath or Nazrul in terms of translation or
Sure.
in terms of celebration, and how our Lalon Shongit or the folk musics are like left behind. And I was actually trying to Google like if there are translations of it or not. There are some translation works, but which is
There
like
are.
very limited, or like it's not even like that celebrated. So yeah, I think
Right. Thank you.
that is something struck my mind as well. Thank you for that.
Talika, thank you much for your observation, and I'm with you. I'm with you. Sure, Lalon's translation, or even translations of Nazrul are not adequate. I mean, and then Lalon is very difficult to translate. Lalon too, very difficult. but then some, yes. I myself translated Lalong into English. I've been cited elsewhere also. My translations have been used elsewhere too. My translation of Lalong. Okay, thank you. Shalika, now
So,
Sumita, am I
so
pronouncing your
can
name correctly?
It says Sumaita.
Sumayata.
Um,
Okay, sorry.
Sumaita. Sumaita.
Sumayata. Go
Okay,
ahead.
sir. So, my question can be a little bit personal. I'm just asking it out of curiosity.
Sure.
I have seen, sir, you have done a translation of Ahmed Faiz's poems.
Faiz Ahmed Faiz is my favorite
Yeah.
Pakistani poet, yes.
Yes, sir. So those were Urdu poems, and I really like his poetry. I just want to know that as a Bangladeshi and someone who is invested in political aspects of Bangla, the language, how was your take on translating something from Urdu? And I just want to know about a little bit of your experience. That how did you
Sure.
approach that?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'm not prejudiced about Urdu. So there is that thing. I'm not prejudiced about Urdu is spoken by people, Pakistanis, of course. Urdu is spoken in India. Urdu is spoken elsewhere. So Urdu does not exclusively belong to Pakistan. And even if Urdu belongs exclusively to Pakistan, we should not be biased about this language. The language didn't come to us and try to conquer us. So, please keep, I keep that in mind. So that's one. And secondly, Faiz Ahmed Faiz is my all-time favorite poet. And Faiz Ahmed Faiz was supportive of, is famous for supporting the cause of Bangladesh's national liberation, actually. In 1971, Faiz Ahmed Faiz himself wrote 3 great poems about Bangladesh, castigating the Pakistani ruling classes. So he did that. So Faiz Ahmed Faiz, I've written about his poems also, like his poems, about Bangladesh. So Faiz Ahmed Faiz supported the liberation war, So that's the thing. And third, I have to tell you this, that very translation was a tricky thing. It's not that I know the Urdu language very well. So there is a great, because, and this is probably the privilege of being in first world academia. You get all kinds of scholars around, you see all kinds of scholars, around. So there is this great Urdu scholar from Lucknow who helped me, who actually provided me with this prose translation. And then I, took that, turned it into this poetic form. It was he, this scholar from Lucknow who helped me, who provided me with this literal translation in Urdu, in English, word to word. And then I know Urdu, understand it to an extent. So the two of us worked together. So, but then I turned it into English. So that's the story behind it, behind translating Faiz Ahmed Faiz into English.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I'm by the the level of questions and the couple of questions that I caught at the tail end sounded like you had a very exciting session and left everyone with much food for thought. So thank you so much for that. And I look forward to having you in person on campus soon. Thank you, Azfar sir. Good night.